My headlamp flickered, casting unsteady shadows across the forest floor. The beam weakened with each pulse, threatening to abandon me to the absolute darkness of the mountainside. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. The temperature had dropped well below freezing hours ago, and my fingers had gone numb despite my gloves. I hadn't seen another human being in over 30 hours. This wasn't how this trip was supposed to go. 3 days earlier, I'd set out on what was meant to be a solo weekend trek through the Hollow Pass Trail. It's a moderately challenging 26-mile loop through the Cascade Range that typically takes hikers 3 to 4 days to complete. I'd done it twice before in summer conditions, but never this late in the season. October in the Pacific Northwest brings unpredictable weather, but the forecast had looked stable. Cold, but clear. I'd packed accordingly. Extra layers, a 4-season tent, sufficient food, and my satellite messenger for emergencies. I'm not reckless. I've been hiking and backpacking for 15 years. I know the rules. I know the risks. What I didn't know was that someone or something was watching me from the moment I stepped onto the trail. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered 9 miles before setting up camp near Holloway Creek, a picturesque spot with a small waterfall cascading into a clear pool. I filtered water, prepared my freeze-dried meal, and settled in for the night. That's when I first noticed something odd. While organizing my gear inside the tent, I could have sworn I heard whistling. 3 ascending notes, repeated at irregular intervals. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of the creek, but distinct enough that I stopped what I was doing to listen. After a minute, it stopped. I poked my head outside, scanning the darkening forest. Nothing but trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. I attributed it to the wind playing tricks through the rock formations upstream and thought nothing more of it. Until 3 a.m., when I woke to the same 3 notes, much closer now. So close, it sounded like someone was whistling right outside my tent. I sat bolt upright, heart racing, and fumbled for my headlamp. The whistling stopped. The instant my light came on. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" but received no answer except the rustling of leaves in the wind. I unzipped my tent and stepped out, sweeping my light across the campsite. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints in the soft earth surrounding my tent besides my own. I circled the entire area, finding nothing unusual, but sleep eluded me for the remainder of the night. Dawn broke, clear and cold. As I packed up, I rationalized the night's events. Probably just a nocturnal bird, or my dreams blending with the sounds of the wilderness. Still, an uneasiness had settled over me, a feeling of being observed that I couldn't shake as I continued along the trail. Midway through the second day, I reached Carson Ridge, the highest point of the Hollow Pass Trail, with stunning views of the surrounding peaks. I stopped for lunch, taking photos of the landscape while trying to ignore the growing sense that I wasn't alone on this supposedly remote trail. I hadn't seen another hiker since I'd started, which wasn't unusual for October. But occasionally, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow darting between trees, a branch swaying against the wind. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. As I continued hiking that afternoon, the trail began to seem wrong. I'd been here before, but landmarks I remembered were either missing or somehow altered. A distinctive boulder shaped like a turtle's shell should have marked the junction to Blackwater Meadow, but it wasn't there. A wooden footbridge I'd crossed on previous hikes had been replaced by a newer one, which seemed impossible given the remote location. I checked my map repeatedly, convinced I'd somehow veered onto an unmarked side trail, but my GPS coordinates confirmed I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I told myself the Park Service must have made changes since my last visit, though that had been just 14 months earlier. By dusk, I'd hiked over 16 miles, far more than I'd planned for day 2, searching for a campsite I remembered near Azure Lake. But when I reached the lake, I froze in confusion. This wasn't Azure Lake. The shoreline was completely different, the surrounding terrain unfamiliar. My map showed I was in the right place, but my eyes told me otherwise. Too exhausted to backtrack, I set up camp in a small clearing about 50 yards from the shore. As darkness fell, an abnormal silence descended on the forest. No insect sounds, no rustling of nocturnal animals, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. Just a heavy, oppressive quiet that made the hair on my neck stand up. I boiled water for dinner on my camp stove, the small flame providing modest comfort in the gathering gloom. As I stirred my rehydrated pasta, I noticed something in the dirt at the edge of my cleared campsite. What looked like a crude symbol scratched into the earth. A circle with 3 wavy lines emanating from it, like a child's drawing of the sun. I frowned, moving closer to examine it. The lines were fresh, the disturbed soil still loose. Someone had drawn this recently, very recently. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shattering the unnatural silence. "Is anybody there?" No response. I returned to my meal, but my appetite had vanished. I forced myself to eat anyway, knowing I needed calories for tomorrow's hike. As I cleaned my cookware, I heard it again. Those same 3 ascending notes whistled from somewhere in the darkness beyond my campsite. "Who's there?" I shouted, anger rising to mask my fear. "This isn't funny." The whistling continued, maintaining its 3-note pattern, but gradually moving around the perimeter of my camp, as if whoever or whatever was making the sound was circling me. I grabbed my trekking poles, clutching one like a weapon, as I stood and spun slowly, trying to track the source. The sound completed a full circuit around me, and then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the whistling had been. I retreated to my tent, but didn't sleep. Instead, I sat upright, with my back against my backpack, knife in one hand, headlamp in the other, listening. Around midnight, a light rain began to fall, pattering against the rainfly. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, daylight was filtering through the tent fabric, and the rain had stopped. I unzipped the tent door and gasped. Surrounding my tent, spaced about 3 feet apart, in a perfect circle, were crude stick figures. Dozens of them, each about a foot tall, constructed from twigs bound with what looked like human hair, each topped with a small animal skull. Birds, squirrels, and what might have been a fox or small coyote. They all faced inward, toward my tent, like silent sentinels. My gear, which I'd left under the tent's vestibule, was untouched. My food bag, which I'd hung from a tree branch 20 yards away, appeared undisturbed. But someone or multiple someones, had constructed these figures and placed them around my tent while I slept. I broke camp in record time, my hands shaking so badly I struggled to collapse my tent poles. I didn't bother with breakfast, just shoved everything haphazardly into my pack and started hiking as fast as I could back the way I'd come. At this point, I just wanted out of these woods. But when I reached the trail junction where I'd turned toward the lake the previous day, I stopped in confusion. The sign marking the junction was gone. In its place stood another stick figure, this one larger than the ones around my tent, at least 3 feet tall. It held something in its crude twig arms, my map, the map I was certain I'd packed away that morning. I approached cautiously, heart hammering. The map had been altered, the trail I'd been following now marked with the same 3 wavy line symbol I'd seen scratched in the dirt. It created a new route, one that cut cross-country away from the main trail, leading to a spot marked with a crude X. I tore the map from the figure's grasp and turned to flee back down the trail, only to discover that the trail was gone. Where the clear path had been just moments before, now stood a dense thicket of vegetation, as if the trail had never existed at all. Panic gripped me. I pulled out my phone to check my GPS app, but despite having fully charged it the previous night, the battery was dead. My satellite messenger showed a similar status, completely drained of power. Impossible. Both devices had battery-saving features and should have lasted several more days. I was lost in unfamiliar terrain, with no visible trail, no working navigation devices, and the increasingly terrifying certainty that I was not alone. With no better options, I oriented myself using the sun and began hiking in what I hoped was the direction back to the trailhead. The going was difficult without a trail, scrambling over fallen logs, pushing through dense underbrush, occasionally having to backtrack around impassable terrain. By midday, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and increasingly desperate. I stopped at a small stream to refill my water bottles, the cold mountain water numbing my fingers as I operated the filter. As I worked, a reflection in the water caught my attention. A figure standing on the bank behind me, tall and gaunt, its proportions somehow wrong. I whirled around, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. Yet when I looked back at the water, the reflection remained for a moment before slowly dissolving into ripples. That's when I found the first body. It was half buried in the soft earth of the stream bank, partially concealed by ferns and moss. I might have missed it entirely, if not for a flash of unnatural color, the bright blue of a rain jacket poking through the vegetation. With trembling hands, I brushed away the covering plants to reveal the desiccated face of a man. His skin leathery and sun-darkened, his eyes and much of his soft tissue gone. Likely the work of scavengers. He appeared to have been dead for months, yet his hiking clothes, high-end gear for recognizable outdoor brands, showed minimal weathering. Around his neck hung a camera, and clutched in his stiffened fingers was a map of the Hollow Pass Trail. Like mine, it had been marked with the strange sun-like symbol, creating an alternate route to the same X location. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This was no accident. This hiker had been led off trail, just as someone was trying to lead me. I had to get out. Now. I abandoned my half-filled water bottle and ran. No longer concerned with direction, just desperate to put distance between myself and the corpse. I crashed through underbrush, scrambled over rocky outcrops, splashed through shallow streams. My lungs burned and branches whipped across my face, leaving stinging welts, but fear drove me onward. After what felt like hours, I collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping for breath. The forest had grown darker, the canopy overhead thicker, blocking much of the afternoon sunlight. As my breathing slowed, I realized with mounting horror that those 3 whistled notes had returned, echoing from multiple directions now, as if I was surrounded by unseen whistlers. And they were getting closer. I pushed myself up and continued running, no longer following any logic or navigation strategy, just fleeing blindly from the encircling sounds. The terrain grew steeper, the forest more dense and primeval. Ancient trees with massive, gnarled trunks rose around me, draped in hanging moss that gave them an anthropomorphic quality in the fading light. Night was approaching, my 3rd night in these woods, and I had no idea where I was. My only consolation was that I'd finally stopped hearing the whistling. As darkness descended, I found myself in a narrow ravine with steep walls rising on either side. At the bottom ran a small creek, its water black in the gathering gloom. With no better option, I followed the creek downstream, hoping it would eventually lead to a larger water body, or perhaps even civilization. That's when I found the 2nd body, and the 3rd, and the 4th. They were arranged in a semicircle on a sandy bank where the creek widened into a small pool. Like the first corpse, these showed various states of decomposition. The newest appeared to have been dead perhaps a few weeks, while the oldest was little more than a skeleton, held together by remnants of clothing and sinew. Each body wore hiking gear. Each had been positioned in a seated posture, facing inward as if gathered for a meeting. And at the center of their grisly circle stood a tall stick figure, similar to the one that had held my map, but larger still, at least 7 feet tall. This one had been augmented with clothing scraps from the dead hikers and crowned with what was unmistakably a human skull. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I stood frozen, staring at the macabre scene as darkness continued to fall around me. And then, in the deepening shadows behind the seated corpses, I saw movement. Tall, impossibly thin figures moving with a jerky, unnatural gait emerged from the forest. Their skin was pale gray where it wasn't covered by ragged, dirt-encrusted clothing. Their limbs were too long, joints bending at odd angles. And their faces, God, their faces, were stretched and distorted, as if their skulls had grown, but their skin hadn't kept pace, creating tight, mask-like visages with eyes that reflected the last of the fading light, like those of nocturnal animals. I counted 5 of them as they formed a loose ring around me and the circle of corpses. 5 emaciated, wrong-looking humanoids regarding me with unblinking eyes. And then, as one, they began to whistle those 3 ascending notes. Primal terror broke my paralysis. I ran, splashing through the creek, scrambling up the opposite bank of the ravine, clawing at roots and rocks to pull myself up the steep slope. Behind me, the whistling grew louder, more frenzied, and I heard the splash of feet pursuing me through the water. I reached the top of the ravine and sprinted into the forest, branches and thorns tearing at my clothing and skin. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed gasping onto the forest floor, physically unable to go any farther. As I lay there, struggling to breathe, my ears strained for sounds of pursuit. Nothing but the soft sighing of wind through the trees. Had I lost them? Or were they still tracking me, moving silently now, closing in from all sides? I forced myself to my feet. I needed shelter, needed to hide. My pack held my tent and sleeping bag, but setting those up would take time I didn't have. Instead, I found a massive fallen log, its interior partially hollowed by rot and burrowing animals. I crawled inside, making myself as small as possible, and waited. Hours passed. The forest grew absolutely dark. The temperature plummeted, and my body began to shake uncontrollably from cold and fear. My headlamp, which had been reliable up to this point, started to flicker and dim despite fresh batteries installed the previous morning. That's where I am now, huddled inside a rotting log in the middle of nowhere, my light failing, listening to those things whistle their three-note call as they search for me. They're close now. So close I can hear the snap of twigs beneath their feet, the rustle of undergrowth as they move. I'm recording this final message on my phone. The battery indicator shows 3%, which shouldn't be possible after less than 3 days away from a charger with minimal usage. Like my headlamp, like my satellite messenger, something is draining the power. I suspect it's the same force that's been distorting the landscape, altering the trail, leading hikers astray for what must be years. If you're hearing this, it means someone found my phone. Please, send help to the Hollow Pass Trail. Look for hikers who've gone missing here. There have been others before me, at least 4 that I've found, and there will be more if whatever lives in these woods continues to lure people off the established paths. The whistling has stopped. The forest has gone completely silent. My headlamp is barely producing light now, just a faint yellow glow that illuminates nothing. Wait. I hear something outside the log. A soft scratching, like twigs against wood. They've found me. I'm going to make a run for it. One last, desperate attempt. If I head downhill, I might reach a road, a town, something. I won't die hiding in a log like a terrified animal. This is Martin Keene, last recording. If I don't make it out, tell my family I love them, and warn everyone, stay off the Hollow Pass Trail. What walks there isn't human anymore. The preceding audio was recovered from a smartphone found in Cascade National Forest, approximately 4 miles from the Hollow Pass trailhead, in an area not intersected by any official trail. The phone belonged to Martin Keene, 34, an experienced hiker, reported missing after failing to return from a solo weekend trek. Despite extensive search efforts, no other trace of Keene has been found. However, during the search operation, authorities discovered human remains matching the descriptions of 4 other hikers who had gone missing in the same general area over the past 3 years. Investigation revealed that a section of the Hollow Pass Trail had been subtly altered, with official trail markers moved to create a false path leading deeper into one of the most remote sections of the forest. Park rangers have temporarily closed the trail, pending a complete review of all markers and signage. The case remains open. The three-note whistling pattern described in Keene's recording has been reported by 2 search and rescue team members, though no evidence of the stick figures or abnormal humanoid entities has been found. The Hollow Pass Trail is scheduled to reopen next season, though rangers recommend hikers travel in groups and carry redundant navigation equipment. Editor's note: the above transcript was provided to the Somber Scroll by an anonymous source claiming to be a Forest Service employee. We cannot verify its authenticity, nor the existence of any official investigation into events at Hollow Pass Trail. However, public records do confirm that 4 hikers were reported missing in Cascade National Forest between 2020 and 2023, with remains recovered in a joint operation in late 2023. The current status of the Hollow Pass Trail is listed as open with restrictions on the National Forest Service website. 3 days after receiving this transcript, our editorial office began receiving anonymous voicemails consisting only of 3 ascending whistled notes. We have chosen to publish this account despite these concerning developments. If any viewers have additional information about Martin Keene or the Hollow Pass Trail, please contact local authorities rather than our channel directly. Remember to stay on marked trails, hike with partners, and always inform someone of your planned route and expected return time.